Año 1400.
The year was 1495. Leonardo is now 43 and had been living here in Milan for 11 years. So much research, so many projects, yet there always remained a dream, an artist's dream of creating a great pictorial work. The occasion materialized, but when? The Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, was a friend of this convent, a friend of this community of Dominicans, because he wanted this convent and church to be his family's burial place. He promised the prior that he would finance an important work of art. And so, he said to Leonardo, "You will paint the scene of the Last Supper in the order's refectory."
Una cena.
A supper.
Una cena.
A supper.
Leonardo
had been asked to paint the Last Supper. For him, this supper was real. It was a real, tangible supper. He knew that when a group of people assembled around a table to share a meal, he had seen him himself in the trattorias of Milan and the Sforza castle. Each person was different. He had seen how everyone ate and drank in their own individual ways, with their own expressions and gestures. So he conceived a real dinner scene because the apostles too were real people. And what did he do? First, even before making the first sketches, he decided to take notes of what he saw. He wanted to record what he saw, spontaneous, natural gestures. Here is part of what he wrote as part of these preparatory observations. Pay close attention to what he says. "I see one man who drank something, put his glass down in its place, and turns his head toward the person speaking to him. And then I see someone with knitted brows and interlaced fingers turning toward his neighbor. I see another man with his hands open wide, palms up, shoulders raised, listening intently, his mouth wide in astonishment. Another man whispers into the ear of his neighbor, who faces him, his ear cocked, paying close attention. I see another figure with a knife in one hand, a knife and a partly cut roll in the other. I also see one in the action of turning, and with a knife in his hand, he overturns a glass on the table. And then there's another man leaning his hands on the table and staring. Another man blows on a morsel of food, and another one approaches them to see what everyone is talking about while shading his eyes with his hand. Finally, I see another man leaning backwards, behind the man bent over, and he looks at the man speaking between the wall and the man bent over. So Leonardo observed all this. When we see his first rough sketches, we realize that what he most wanted to show, he even draws a few nude figures, was the range of different gestures. Gestures that belong to whom? To each individual, to each one of these people, who are all different from one another. This is a supper. When he was commissioned to do the painting, he asked the friars of the convent, "What part of the supper do you want me to paint? What should I paint?" "Everyone has done a Last Supper," they probably replied. "Florence is filled with Last Suppers. Everyone knows how to paint a Last Supper." "No, no, no," Leonardo responded. "A supper is very long. As a painter, I can only paint one moment. One moment. And the moment he chose was not the moment of the Eucharist. It was the moment when Jesus said, "One of you will betray me." This painting depicts an episode that took place on the afternoon of Holy Thursday, the supper of Holy Thursday, when Jesus was with the apostles. There were three moments that Leonardo could have painted: when Jesus washed his disciples' feet, when he celebrated the Eucharist, or when he said, "One of you will betray me." Of these three possibilities, Leonardo chose this statement, this accusation that Jesus makes. So he chose this moment, he chose it himself. Yes, it was his choice, but we also think that it was probably suggested by the priests, the Dominican fathers that lived in the convent. When he made this statement, Jesus was alone. In the painting, he sits inside a perfect equilateral triangle that emphasizes his isolation. How did Leonardo compose this painting? How did he go about it? Most painters, after having made their initial preliminary sketches, work continuously on their painting. But Leonardo didn't do this. His work was constantly being interrupted. How do we know this? There is a document, a famous letter written by Matteo Bandello, who was present as Leonardo executed the work on the painting. Looking back on the days he spent in the company of the master painter, Bandello recalled, "I have seen him often and analyzed him many times." Very early in the morning, Leonardo would climb the scaffold, because the Last Supper is quite high above the floor, and there, from dawn to dusk, not once would he put down his paintbrush. After that, he might go 2, 3, even 4 days without touching the painting, but sometimes, for 1 or 2 hours a day, he would just stare there looking at it, studying each figure. So this was Leonardo's method of working. What it means is that while he was painting this masterpiece, Leonardo da Vinci was also thinking about the horse, that huge statue, and he was probably also still thinking about human anatomy he was dissecting here in Milan. But then he was also probably wondering, how can I perfect that flying machine? In other words, at any given moment of his life, any moment in time, his mind would be envisioning and formulating all sorts of projects, and he was capable of working on each of them in a fragmented way. This is how Leonardo created this wonderful painting. I'd like to go back to something Professor Natali in Florence told us about the theological content that is an essential part of Leonardo's Annunciation. He said, "The mountain towering over the sea is Christ in the world, God before his incarnation, present in the background of the painting. And in the foreground, we find the moment of his incarnation in the womb of the Virgin Mary. So now, if we understand that God is made incarnate in Christ, and that Leonardo, as an artist, was fascinated by the possibility of depicting the mystery at the very moment of this mystical occurrence, we may draw a connection between his first painting, the Annunciation, and the Last Supper,
la montagna,
the mountain,
verbo di Dio si è
the Word of God made flesh,
che
and
viene
Christ
a
who
redimirci,
has come to redeem
che
us,
es
but is
rechazado.
rejected. Before painting the mural of the Last Supper, Leonardo experimented with various techniques in an effort to achieve the very best visual quality for his images. He succeeded. Not long afterward, however, the mural began to deteriorate. Later on, it suffered a number of disastrous restoration efforts, and then a bombing raid during World War II caused the refectory to collapse, leaving the Last Supper all but unrecognizable. Its definitive restoration was supervised by Dr. Pietro Marani, president of the Raccolta Vinciana.
Il restauro del cenacolo.
We have filmed the restoration of the Last Supper over the course of several hours, and so we have been alone with this masterpiece for some time. Tell us, how did the restoration begin? It has been a wonderful adventure. I arrived at the superintendency of Milan in 1983 when Professor Pertelli had just started the restoration of the Last Supper. 1 year later, he put me in charge of the project, along with the conservator Pinim Brambilla. Once a decision was made to restore the painting, how long did it take until you finally said, the restoration is finished? Not including the studies, but from the moment you knew how you would restore it, how much time passed? Let's see, Pertelli first ordered samples to be done for the painting in 1978. So between the first attempts to remove varnish and older paint, which started in 1978, and the completion of the work in 1999, 21 years went by. It was such a long and drawn-out process that it allowed the team to incorporate several new restoration methods, which made this intervention something of a test lab that others in Europe have learned from. The experience has evolved and changed over these 21 years. I was thinking something. In light of the rise of modern painting, to see the Last Supper in this way, not perfectly defined, the image becomes even more suggestive and is even more open to appreciation. You make a very good point. Modern painting started with the Last Supper. This is what Vasari says when he places Leonardo at the beginning of the modern method. And all the great modern painters from 1500 onwards have considered it the most representative example of modern painting. This is because of the shift in depicting moods, movements suggested by the mind, gestures. All of this is a psychology of the characters communicated through their attitudes. After wandering for some time amid obstacles hidden in the shadows, I found the entrance to a large cavern. And I was astonished and surprised by this discovery. Then, crouching down, firmly resting one weary hand on my knee, while shielding my eyes with my right hand, I turned this way and that to see if I could make out the image of anything inside. but the deep and utter darkness prevented me from seeing anything. After some time, two things suddenly came over me: fear and desire. Fear produced by the dark, threatening cave, and desire to see if there might be something miraculous somewhere inside. This text starts with a few words that I'm going to read to you now. For me, driven by my irresistible desire, an irresistible desire, it is pure delight looking at the great number of strange and varied forms that one finds in ingenious nature. Nature is artistic, constantly producing strange and marvelous forms. For Leonardo, the darkness, the abyss, was this new thing that awaits us in the bottomless depths of all that remains unknown to us. Leonardo was a man who set off in search of the unknown. This is the cave he always wanted to enter. All that is new awaits us. I am in the Grand Hall of the Louvre. Leonardo's paintings hang on this wall. The Virgin of the Rocks, 4 figures set in the same cavern that Leonardo had described as his spiritual life. Why? Why not in a pleasant landscape filled with sunlight? Why this darkness? Leonardo explained, all that is mysterious to us is distant, far from what we can understand. So he kept this subject at a distance from our understanding. Nevertheless, in this cavern, in this darkness, details begin to emerge little by little. The landscape behind everything, those mountains, are always there. We even saw it in the Annunciation. And we saw it in the first landscape that Leonardo painted for his master Verrocchio's work, the baptism of Christ. Here the mountains are just a small part of the scene. This repetition of the gesture is very interesting. Here we see a woman, 2 naked children, and a mysterious youth of indistinct gender, together in a lonely place that would appear to be a cavern. The woman and the 2 children are looking at one another. Only the youth looks at us and talks to us, pointing to one of the children with his right index finger. He is telling us that the little child on one knee, John the Baptist, beneath the Virgin's loving gaze, is humbly receiving the blessing of the other child, Jesus. Through this act, Jesus prepares him for a divine mission, martyrdom, which is something both of them will endure. The youth, an angel sent from heaven, attends and protects this blessing, placing his left hand behind Jesus' back. The fissures in the rocks were a result of Christ's passion. This was revealed to Saint Francis of Assisi, who retreated into them to pray.
Here
in the Museo Ideale Leonardo da Vinci, in the village of Vinci, Museum Director Alessandro Vezzozzi maintains an atmosphere of semi-darkness in this old wine cellar where several of Leonardo's inventions are on exhibit. As we enter this place, it feels as if we are exploring that unknown reality that Leonardo described as a cavern. Tell me something. This adjective, ideal, makes a lot of promises. An ideal museum. You could have called this the Leonardo da Vinci Museum, but no, it's the Ideal Museum. Why ideal? My objective was to create a museum that would be ideal for understanding Leonardo in all his extraordinary complexity. Naturally, this is a museum of ideas, but it's also a living museum that seeks to take those theories of imaginary museums and make them tangible, real. The goal is to explore Leonardo's entire body of work as an artist, a scientist, an inventor, but also his ideas, his life, the places he lived, and his influence over the past 5 centuries. So it is also the first virtual museum that explores Leonardo, his vast body of work, and the context he encompasses. In Leonardo's time, both conventional tastes and church precepts dictated that painters were to portray saints standing and lined up alongside each other, immobile, like statues, so they could easily be recognized by the faithful. Leonardo scorned this trend because he believed that each character he painted should express his or her inner feelings through clear, identifiable gestures. He demonstrated this in his painting of Saint Jerome. In this painting of Saint Jerome, a lion accompanies the saint because he removed thorns from the animal's paws. With its jaws wide open, the beast roars as if joining Jerome in his self-imposed penance, striking his breast with a stone. Leonardo had certainly read the Golden Legend in which Saint Jerome writes to Eustace, "With rage against myself but determined, I went to the desert alone and discovered a cave, a broken rock, and I paused there to pray. I made such places the prison of my sinful flesh. It is admirable and praiseworthy to kill impious thoughts when they arise by smashing them with a stone." In Milan, Leonardo met Luca Pacioli, a friar who also happened to be the leading mathematician of his day. The author of De Divina Proporzione, a treatise on perfect or Platonic geometric forms, Pacioli needed an artist who would be able to draw these figures with extreme accuracy. Leonardo knew how. This exercise of drawing these transparent volumes like very complex geometric cages gave Leonardo valuable experience that he would be able to apply later on when he drew with the very same precision the many machines, always useful machines, that he was forever inventing. We are finally here in the Sala della Rosa of the Ambrosian Library in Milan, where we will explore Leonardo's Atlantic Codex. I have with me here 6 of the 12 volumes to show you some of the drawings he made on such a great range of topics. Now let's see. When he conceived the ideal city, Leonardo asked himself, how might I move around in this city of canals? I have conceived elevated streets, ground-level streets, and squares. He also, in fact, envisioned that in addition to pedestrians, in addition to wagons, certain machines would be circulating to transport people around. He envisioned nothing less than the automobile. Here is the drawing, a motorized vehicle with its organism. And when we study it, we see that he was absolutely right. We have seen the model of this automobile in Vinci, and here is the original drawing, one of the original drawings. But in order to prove that he also knew about geometry and perspective, he drew various wheels, both for artistic and useful ends. For example, he made drawings like this one. Let's take a look. The great wheel. It could be the wheel of a mill for channeling water from one place to another, or perhaps it is an exercise in perspective. Just look at how perfect this drawing is. 3 centuries later, the French philosopher Diderot, who assembled and edited the French Encyclopédie, insisted that the illustrators use Leonardo da Vinci's rigorously executed drawings to explain each one of the inventions, each one of the machines presented in the many volumes of this famous reference work.
¿Diseñó Leonardo algún edificio?
Did Leonardo design any buildings during his time in Milan? Yes. The Fabbrica del Duomo commissioned him to design a dome to complete the cathedral. According to the contract for the design of the dome of the Milan Cathedral, Leonardo was to present the commission with drawings of the structure as well as a wooden scale model similar to the one Brunelleschi had made for the Duomo in Florence. The original contract remains intact and may be found in the archives of the offices of the Fabbrica del Duomo in Milan. Here is the original document. To Leonardo, Florentine, to whom the Fabbrica commissions a study of the dome, the Tiburio, Leonardo insisted on making two models. Unfortunately, both have been lost. Here are the records of three payments made, the first on the 8th of August, 1487, the second on 30th of September of the same year, both for 8 liras, and he was paid the final balance of 40 liras on the 11th of January, 1488. It was an enterprise that Leonardo took very seriously. In his mind's eye, he would return over and over again to the dome of the Santa Maria del Fiore church in Florence that Brunelleschi had conceived and built. During the 17 years he lived in Milan, Leonardo painted magnificent portraits of a number of Duke Ludovico's courtiers. Some of these still exist. For example, the painting of the composer Franchino Gaffurio, who was chapel master at the cathedral. Lucrezia Crivelli, who was known as La Belle Ferronnière, and Cecilia Gallerani, the Duke's young mistress. The mother, Leonardo's mother, Caterina, we don't even know her last name. Did Leonardo ever see Caterina? Yes, he saw her again. When she was 66 years old, in 1493, she went to see him in Milan. Leonardo received her and he wrote, "Caterina has arrived." The following year, at the age of 67, Caterina died in Milan, and her son Leonardo made the funeral arrangements. How little we know about Caterina, such a short story. With her husband, she had one daughter and 2 sons. Nothing is known of them. Leonardo studied nature and designed useful machines, usually not because he was commissioned to do so. Almost all his studies and inventions were personal initiatives, exclusively personal quests. He even said as much in a question that he wrote and then answered himself. Leonardo, he asked himself, why do you work so hard? The answer, oh, I never grow tired of serving, of doing good things. In other words, all that he studied and invented was to benefit mankind, to benefit humanity. These were not hired jobs.
Ludovico Sforza
fled Milan on the 24th of September, 1499. 15 days later, King Louis XII entered the city and met Leonardo. After admiring the Virgin of the Rocks, the Last Supper, Saint John the Baptist, he asked Leonardo to paint the Virgin and Child. Leonardo drew the final drawing, which we will now take a look at. When he left Milan in 1500, Leonardo traveled to Mantua on the invitation of the Marquis Isabella de Gonzaga, a woman greatly admired in the artistic milieu of her time for her beauty and culture. Already famous for his painting of the Last Supper, Leonardo was received as the genius of his age. In the Marquis's palace, he drew a profile of Isabella and promised to paint her portrait, but in the end, he never did. Here in Mantua, Leonardo saw the frescoes that the great artist Andrea Mantegna painted in the Castello di San Giorgio, the residence of the Gonzaga family. In the so-called bridal chamber, Mantegna had done portraits of all the members of the family, including very important family friends such as Christian of Denmark and the Emperor Frederick III. Near Mantua, on Teieto Island, Francis II Gonzaga had built large, comfortable stables for his beloved, purebred horses. The passion for horses was something he shared with Leonardo, who studied them assiduously and had shown his drawings of horses to the Marquis Isabella d'Este some time before. These same drawings influenced the artist Giulio Romano, who later made life-size paintings of Duke Federico's favorite horses. Their names? Morel Favorito, Glorioso, Battaglia, and Dario. In 1490, Leonardo turned 38. As we know, he had first arrived in Milan in 1482 at the age of 30. During his time there, Leonardo traveled to several other cities in the north of Italy. One particularly special destination for him was Pavia, which he visited in 1490. Pavia was a city with teachers, very demanding teachers, including a few who were specialized in anatomy. Leonardo was already a keen student of the human body, drawing excellent cross-sections of bones, muscles, and other things. But he wanted to meet a teacher, a real teacher. He went to Pavia and attended classes with anatomy teachers there. But he found his fellow students terribly undisciplined. They were constantly making trouble, and he couldn't concentrate. This is what he said of them in his diary from the time. I must say a word about the discipline that is urgently needed by these impertinent students who exist in the company of oafs and courtiers. Here he is talking about the people who follow these students around, egging them on. These courtiers are like dogs and the scavenger animals that travel with them, constantly running alongside those who try to flee them, pursuing these innocent animals. And then, like hungry beasts in days of great snowstorms, they come to your house pleading for charity, just as they do with their teachers. With these words, Leonardo condemned not only the bad students who were simply not interested in learning, he was also talking about those who incited these students. And he also had something to say about the good ones, the humble ones. He was always a demanding teacher, always. Later on, several years later, as we will see, he founded his own academy where he received, as you can well imagine, truly dedicated students. Leonardo compared the human organism to nature. He saw this similarity, and in the Hammer Codex he wrote the following: hair sprouts forth on animals, grass grows in the fields, and leaves in the trees. We could say then that the earth has a vegetative spirit. Its flesh is the soil. Its cartilage is the tufa stone. Its blood, the veins of its waters. And the vital heat of the world is fire, which is contained within it. On that journey from Milan to Venice, Leonardo knew that he would pass through Padua. He was very anxious to visit the city because he wanted to see the sculptures of the greatest artist of his time, Donatello. During the 15th century, in order to protect their freedoms, it was typical for certain cities and families to hire mercenary troops, which they would place under the command of a valiant and trusted general. Donatello depicted one of these mercenaries, Erasmo da Narni, nicknamed Gattamelata, in a bronze sculpture. There was no other sculpture to rival it, though many had copied it. When Leonardo saw it, he may have found inspiration for his drawings of the equestrian statue commissioned by the Field Marshal Trivulzio. Leonardo wanted to find out if Giotto had really been Masaccio's master inspiration. Giotto, Masaccio. Leonardo felt that they were the only two painters who had not imitated their masters and instead had plumbed their innermost feelings, their very real and present visions, to create a new form of art. Here in the Scrovegni Chapel, he found the painting of a great master. Leonardo knew that Giotto had depicted all of Christian history, from the Annunciation through to the Last Judgment, and that in addition he had also created paintings of humanity, real humanity of flesh and bone, the kind of humanity that is expressed through basic natural gestures. In settings that were very real, but not overloaded with details. On this marble slab, we find 3 verses from the Divine Comedy that Dante Alighieri dedicated to his friend Giotto. I'm going to read them. In painting, Cimabue thought he held the field, and now it's Giotto they acclaim. The former only keeps a shadowed fame. Leonardo agreed with the poet.